Okay, can you all hear me on this? Well, your generation has gone through another recession. It's not a real depression. It was nowhere near as bad as the real depression. The real depression, we had about 40% unemployed, not 12% or something like that. And also, Franklin Roosevelt, all the banks were starting to fail. And Franklin Roosevelt, our president at that time, closed all the banks, and most of them never reopened. President Obama did a much better job, and so people haven't lost their money in banks. But in the first depression, everybody who had money in banks never saw it again. And also, most people were unemployed, and it was so bad they used to have soup kitchens on the corners in the downtown because people were starving to death, and you could crawl down to a soup deal and get a little bit of soup to maybe keep you alive one more day. It was a terrible depression, and I was my father had been vice president of W.R. Grayson Company, the second biggest steamship company in the world. And when I was 8 months old, when I was born, we had a Packard car, we had a chauffeur, we had a governess, we had a maid. We were living in total luxury. And when I was 8 months old, my father died in the flu epidemic. Now, the flu epidemic at the end of World War I, more people died than all the people in every war in the world. Millions and millions all over the world died. And my father suddenly died, and he did his will, left us the house and some stocks, and the stocks all became worthless during the Depression. And so if you had stocks, unless you had AT&T, that's the only one that continued to pay dividends. And that's why when I finally graduated from Duke, from college, I went with AT&T because I knew they were the most reliable country in business in the world, and they're the biggest business in the world. And I ended up with some very, very big jobs with AT&T, and that was a real winner. But my mother had to depend on her father, and my mother's father had been a lame, deaf, poor janitor. He could hardly walk. He had no teeth because he never could go to the dentist. He was a janitor, and he was dreadfully poor, and he was stone deaf. So that's who brought me up, my grandfather, who, in my opinion, was the most wonderful man in all the world. And at first, when he came to America from Holland, he got a job for an inventor. And the inventor was a German, and he invented the postal stamp that they used just till a few years ago, that you use on all your mail and other things like that. And my grandfather started as a janitor, just cleaning up his place, and he soon found out my grandfather knew more than all his engineers. And so my grandfather became his aide. But when World War II started, he found out, during World War I, he found out that the inventor, who was a German, was making false bombs for our army. He was actually in favor of Germany, and my father had to turn him in, and he lost his job, and then he went back to being a janitor again. So we were very poor during the war, because what happened? The first thing that happened to my grandpa, he lost his job. He lost all his savings in the bank in Brooklyn. All the banks had closed. And my grandmother, his wife, died of fright. And when he could stand losing all his savings and his job, but when he lost his wife, he walked in front of the car and tried to commit suicide. And he spent 3 months in the hospital, and my mother had no money. My father had paid off the mortgage in the house and left the stocks, which were no good. But my mother had no money at all, none. And my mother, who had been so pretty and so popular that she had been the greeter at Carnegie Hall, the most famous place in the world. My mother was the greeter. She greeted all the great stars of those days. The great singer, which was, who was the singer at that day? Who? Robert Caruso. She entertained Caruso. She entertained Madame Schumann Heike. She entertained the Gibson Girl and all that stuff. But she then had no money, and my mother ended up going door to door in the snow in the winter in New York City. Her shoes were ruined, so she was walking almost barefoot, trying to sell cheap greeting cards. My mother went from being governess at the Carnegie Hall to nothing. And by the Depression, I'm 94 now, I'll be 95 soon. And so I was 10 years old in 1929 when the Depression hit. And I was going door to door trying to sell pork sausage meat in a Jewish neighborhood. Now, some of you may know Jews are not allowed to eat pork, so it took some real salesmanship. But I was going around in my little express wagon trying to do that. So we lived in total depression. Okay, what else would you like to know? That's a little about the Depression. Well, I'll tell you what he did. What he did to save us is when he got out of the hospital, he came home to die. But he looked at us two little kids, and I was like 8. I was about a year old, and my brother was about 3. And he saw that we were starving. And he saw my mother had hocked all the furniture in the house to try to get food. And so the house was freezing. We were sleeping on the floor, and my grandfather decided the way to save us was to plant our own garden. And so what little money my grandpa had, he went down to the drugstore and he got seeds to grow corn, seeds to grow peas, seeds to grow all sorts of vegetables, because seeds were at 5 cents a packet, and he could afford that. So he grew the seeds, and we started a garden in the first backyard, and then we dug up the whole front yard, and we started a garden in the front yards, and pretty soon we were selling vegetables, and we were selling vegetables all over the place, and also first to feed ourselves and then to sell them to get a little money to buy some milk or something other than vegetables. And so that's what we did at first, and Grandpa really made this, and then he had a brother who lived upstate, and he had a farm, and he was grinding up his pigs and making the sausage meat that I tried to sell in Jewish New York. And then he also took his forest around his farm, and he was cutting it up, and I had, in addition to having some vegetables to sell, I had a copy of a log, and I would take that around and try to sell it for firewood. We would use it in some of it in our own fireplace, because our house was beginning to freeze. If the house froze, and in New York you get a lot of ice, you get a lot of snow, the pipes would break and bust, and they would ruin the house. The water would go all over the house, so we had to keep the house a certain temperature. So that's how we got by, with the logs from my grandfather's brother, and the sausage meat and the vegetables, and that's how we survived the Depression. And I had no shoes, and when I got to the 8th grade, there was a wonderful teacher. You have a wonderful teacher here. And this wonderful teacher looked at me, and a lot of kids had bad shoes, but I had no shoes. And he could see I was living in terrible poverty. And he said, "Teddy," he said, "you're an exciting little kid." He says, there's something called the Kiwanis Club. And he said they have a speech contest every year, and it's coming up real soon. And the winning prize is $25, and the second prize is $15, and you also win a scholarship to college. And I said, well, sir, I will never go to college. My family has no money. I won't ever go to college, but they could sure use that $15 or $25 so we could buy some real coal for the furnace. That's what we really need. So he said, I'll set this up. So I got in my bike, and I was going to show pictures of my mother had when my father was manager at W.R. Grayson Company in San Francisco at first. And they were pictures of Lake Tahoe and San Francisco and all that. So I was going to give a speech on America the Beautiful, although I had never seen it because I was born in Seattle, but I left when I was 6 weeks old and moved to New York when my father became vice president and before he died. So anyway, I went down, and I don't know whether any of you know where the movie industry, we just looked at last night we saw that wonderful movie awards last night. Do you know where the movie started? They didn't start in Hollywood. They started near Broadway in New York. Their first plots, their first stars were from Broadway, where all the theaters were. The theaters were in Broadway, New York City. And the nearest place to New York City that had big warehouses, big enough to take movies and film them in movies that had a warehouses big enough was Astoria, which was right next to Flushing, where I lived. And so I didn't realize that this teacher of mine had invited 3 movie directors from Astoria, right next to Flushing. And they were used to helping little scared kids that were going to be in the movies, and the kids were so scared they didn't know what to do. He was used to helping them speak and getting them calmed down. So when I first got there, I was soaking wet, going in my bike to give my speech. When I first got there, one of these gentlemen came up and he said, I understand you have no father. And I said, no, sir, I have no father. And he said, well, could I be your father for today? He said, I'll help you. He said, where is your speech? So I showed him my little speech that I had written up, and it was all about the wonderful things around San Francisco that I'd never seen, but my mother had pictures of when she lived there with my dad. And there were pictures of Lake Tahoe and Yosemite and all the wonderful things we have here in California. And so my little speech was to show a picture of Lake Tahoe and tell them all about Lake Tahoe, because my mother used to tell me about all this stuff. And then I'd show them a picture of San Francisco or a picture of something else. I said, that's what I'm going to do. He said, well, where's your script? So I showed him. I said, this is my script here. And he said, well, without looking at the script, tell me about some of these things. And I did. And he said, I see you told me all these things without using the script. And I said, that's right, sir, but I'm going to use my scripts to talk. He said, you don't need the script. You just gave the talk to me. He said, all these other little kids are going to get up and they're going to read the script, and they're going to be looking down reading the script. He said, you never, ever win a speech contest reading a speech. You look at your audience in the eye. You talk to them personally. You can start by looking at me. My name is Goldberg, and I'll be in the front yard, in the front row. And here's my friend over here, and he was another Jewish guy, and then the other. They were all 3 movie directors. And he said, so first just look at Goldberg, then look at me, and then look at the other Jewish guy we got here, and then start looking at everybody else. And he said, all these other dumb little kids are going to go up and they're going to read the speech. Nobody's going to look at him, and he's not going to look back at them, and he's going to lose it. He says, you're going to win. You're going to win the $25. I said, $25? $25. We have never had $25. He said, you do what I say. So when I got up there to speak, I did just what I said. I looked at Goldfarb, I looked at Horowitz, I looked at each of them, and then I began to look at everybody else. And pretty soon I'm rolling, man, because they had ripped up my script. And I was talking to everybody. Well, to make a long story short, I was in the 8th grade, and I won the whole contest. No, I didn't. I came in second because the woman that came in first was Natalie Wood, who was Jewish, and her father was in that Kiwanis Club. So they all voted for Natalie Goldberg, and I remember her name to this day. Actually, I think it was Lottery Wood, but anyway, whatever her name was, it's in my book. And so I hated it till the time I left. But anyway, she won the $25, but I won the $15. And the next thing, the guy that brought me, he said, how are you going to get home, Teddy? I said, I'm going to go home just how I got here on my bicycle. He said, look out the window. It's been snowing in here the whole time you gave your speech, and everybody gave their speech, and we had lunch. It's about 2 feet deep now, the snow. He said, I'll take you home. And he took me home, and he started to go in the house. And my mother never let anybody in our house because she didn't want to see what had happened to us. The house was freezing cold. The furniture was all gone. We were in terrible shape. And he passed her. He says, I want to see the man of the house. And he pushed by my mother. My mother always met people at the door. She already had a coat on because she already had a coat on in the house. It was freezing so badly. And he pushed past my mother, and he said, I want to see the man of the house. And my grandpa was sitting having his lunch because every morning he got up at 4 a.m. and he walked for miles and miles through the snow. And he got to the Mack Truck Company, and nobody worked for Mack Truck because some people were killed every day. There were no safety in those days. And everybody would be working on the big Mack Truck dress line, and they would get hurt. And there was no insurance in those days, nothing like that. And so nobody would work for Mack Truck except my grandpa. And so he said, maybe they'll hire me, nobody else will work there. And so he worked for Mack Truck. And he was all worn out, and he was sitting on a box, eating off a box because all our dining room table had been hawked. And so Mr. Horowitz started to talk to my grandpa and soon found out he was stone deaf. And then he tried to get up, and he could see my grandpa couldn't stand. He was so lame. He couldn't hear, he couldn't stand. And he said, my God, look at this family. They have nothing. So he said to my mother, he said, would you show me the pictures, the pictures that your son showed? And my mother took him in the living room, and all the furniture was gone. There was nothing in the living room except the old beat-up couch and my mother's desk. And he looked in there, it was freezing, and he saw the pictures. He says, Mrs. Robinson, your husband, your son, has come in number 2 in the contest. And he's now going to have to speak to the Kiwanis Club in Bayside, the Kiwanis Club in Forest Hills, the Kiwanis Club. He had about 8 Kiwanis Clubs all lined up, he says, and every month your son will speak, and every month he'll get $15, which will buy a load of coal. And every month, because we had no telephone, a big car with a Kiwanis thing on it would drive in front of our house. And my mother would get all dressed up. She hadn't eaten in a restaurant in years and years. And she got some of her old clothes and got dressed up, and she could go out and speak to a Kiwanis Club and try to get dressed up as best she could. And men were so polite to her and so nice to her. And so every month she marked the date on that I would give my speech, and I would give it. And I got better and better at the speech, and I started winning first prizes because Natalie Wolf wasn't in those clubs. So I was starting to get $25, and that supplied us the whole winter. And that's what the Depression was like.
Is this where your love of the Kiwanis has come from? Is that where it started?
Yes, I ended up joining Kiwanis, and I've been to Kiwanis ever since. And my wife here is the longest continual volunteer. She's volunteered for work for nothing for 28 years at the Kiwanis Family House. The Kiwanis Family House is over here at the UCD Med Center. The UCD Med Center on Stockton Boulevard, that big hospital there, takes all children that have cancer or cystic fibrosis west of the Mississippi, and they take them to their hospital, or they take them to the one that not the Shriners. If they're burned, if they have fire damage, they take them to the one what's the name of that one? The Shriners Hospital, and a lot of their parents have no money. They maybe have enough to get a car and dry out, but they can't afford to pay for a motel or a hotel, so they're sleeping in their cars in the winter in Sacramento, and going daily to see their sons who are dying in either the UCD Med Center of cancer and that sort of thing. And so now they can go to our Kiwanis Family House, which my Kiwanis Club built. I helped build it. I was one of the guys that helped start that thing, and my wife has worked there for years. And now those poor parents of kids, instead of sleeping in their cars, can sleep in a nice home, the Kiwanis Family House, right on the grounds of the hospital, where they feed them and take care of them. And so we are very important in that thing. That's one of the many things. My wife has also been the longest volunteer at the Easter Seal, where very crippled kids go. She did that for years and became Woman of the Year for that in the 70s. Next question.
So, well, while we're on the public service thing, you were very involved with you were the park commissioner of Sacramento?
Yes.
Is that correct?
When I retired, a lady in our church said, she said, Ted, you're a speaker. You're the speaker of the biggest speaking bureau in the United States, which I was. I became the head of the AT&T speaking bureau for the whole West Coast. I had 60 speakers work for me, and I gave all the major speeches all over the country. And so I got out of that, and a gal in our church ran the Tree Foundation. And so they asked me if I would be the speaker for the Sacramento Tree Foundation, and I did that for 12 years. And we made that Tree City, we made Sacramento Tree City, USA. We have planted more trees than any city in the United States, and that was thanks to me and the gal in my church and the president. And the president of that Tree Foundation had been she wasn't Miss Las Vegas, she was Miss Indiana, in a beautiful, beautiful girl. Her picture is in the last page of my book. And she was president of the Tree Foundation, and she and I and a bunch of people made that Tree Foundation to be the biggest tree foundation in the world, and I still raise money for them, incidentally. So then, by the time I finished that after 12 years, the president of the Sacramento Chamber of Commerce, Sacramento County Board of Supervisors, Isla Collin, who ran Sacramento for 40 years. She's a terrific gal. She said, Ted, I want you to be my tree. I want you to be our park commissioner. You'll be in charge of the American River Parkway, 5 golf courses, 18 parks, and 10 historical monuments. And I said, well, why do you want me? You're a liberal Democrat, and I'm kind of a half-baked Republican. And I said, why would you? I don't live in your neighborhood. You live down in the Pocket area. I live in Arden Oaks. And I said, why would you want me? And she said, Ted, you're the biggest mouth in Sacramento County. So I worked for parks for 20 years. And I was very fundamental in saving the American River Parkway. I belong to all the organizations that run the place. I ran the whole park system. Uh, anyway, the president of the Tree Foundation was a gal by the name of Linda Orlick, and she was beautiful. She had been Miss Indiana, and she and I traveled together raising all the money for the Tree Foundation. And then she got MS. She was going to be the next mayor of San Francisco. In fact, the next mayor after her of Sacramento, did have also got MS, as you know. What was her name? I forgot the mayor of Sacramento after her. But Linda Orlick got MS, and she went downhill like this. She got worse and worse and worse. And the day she got in a wheelchair, her husband left her. She had nobody to help her. Nobody would call her anymore. She couldn't work anymore. She had no money. And so my wife and I kind of adopted her. And when she had pushed a button on her, round her neck, it rang our phone. And I would go over there at 2 in the morning or 5 in the a.m., lift her off the ground because she couldn't walk and she was trying to get to the bathroom. And we took care of her for years and years, and we still do. She finally got so bad that she and I agreed she had to go in a big care center, so we checked all the MS care centers in the United States. And the number one care center in the United States is in Cincinnati, Ohio, which was close to her mother and her sister and her best friend. So we arranged to get her in that care house back there. I went back there. I got her settled in there. I talked to the head of the care center. I got her but before all that happened, the way we supported her, she would photograph me talking, and she made 56 copies of my book. And she and my wife talked me into writing a book. And I paid her $90 every week for 56 weeks, over a year, to do that. And that gave her something to do, that she felt like she could do something. Linda's now been since Cincinnati. I call her every third night before she goes to bed, so she knows somebody loves her and somebody's looking after her. I send it when I have a real good book sales. A lot of it goes to Linda, and a lot of it goes to a lot of some family. We have some family problems that need help too. We won't get into them. But anyway, so that's what's next.
Awesome. Well, we're ready to go to war.
Okay, war. All right.
You enlisted, you were...
What happened, my mother was a very strong supporter of England, and she was English. And my mother, when things got better, the way things got better is eventually my father got a job with Mack Truck, and he got a job, and I was able to go to Duke University. And I went to Duke University because it was the cheapest university in the world. It was $790 because it had just started. Nobody ever heard of Duke. It had just opened. But it's the most beautiful campus in the whole world. Nothing can compare to it. But nobody had no reputation. I mean, people that wanted to go somewhere went to Yale, Harvard, Princeton, and those schools, Stanford, and so on, but not to Duke. Duke was only $795 a year. It was the cheapest university you could go to, and that's why I went to Duke. And I went to Duke, and I did very well at Duke. I never went to class because I found out the South, where Duke was located, was so far behind the New York and New York State and New York City schools that I'd already learned all the stuff Duke was teaching. So I never went to class. I went downtown every day, and what I did is I sold copies of the Duke and Duchess humor magazine to the poor residents of Durham, where Duke's located, because the downtown merchants, like the restaurants, the shoe stores, knew the Duke students were rich. So they wanted to attract Duke students. Okay, next question.
When did you enlist?
Oh, so I got out of Duke, and I got a wonderful job in Wall Street for the chemical bank. I had a terrific job, wonderful job. I was being trained executive, be a bank president on Wall Street. Without doubt, I was going to be, because my father's best friend was president of not only the Bank of Manhattan, but he was president of the Bank of America for the whole world, for the whole country. He was head of the Bankers Trust. And so I was going to be president of a bank. But I didn't want to stay in New York because if you ever been in New York, it's so crowded and so busy. And I love sports. And meanwhile, World War I was started, and Britain was in the war, and my mother was trying to help England. And so I decided to get in the Navy. And so I went down half a year before Pearl Harbor. I went in May of 1941, and I got in the Navy. And they said, no, you got to wait till January of 42 to get in the Naval Academy, and so I didn't go there until then. And then I became number two in my college, in the Navy school, and it wasn't Annapolis; it was a branch of Annapolis. I was number one in my class, so I could pick anywhere I went. So I picked PT boats, and you only could get in PT boats if you had boating experience before the war. And while we were desperately poor, I had an uncle who had a yacht on Long Island Sound that I crewed on when I was like 12 and 13. And that got me into PT boats. You had to have, and I went into PT boats, and they were like the SEALs of their day. They were little wooden boats. There's a copy of one up here. They had no armor plate whatsoever. They had 4 torpedoes. And we would take those little wooden boats up against Japanese big steel destroyers and cruisers and attack them. You had to be a little crazy to go in PT boats. You had to sign the thing that you're going to do that. And so I did that. And that's how I got into PT boats. And the minute we graduated from PT school, we were sent to Panama because the Japanese had, see, I already got a bandage on. Your bandage fell off, honey. Anyway, I fell the other day. I'm 94, and once in a while I fall down. But anyway, I was sent to Panama right away because they thought that the minute the Japanese destroyed the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, they would attack the Panama Canal. So the Atlantic Fleet would have to go clean around the bottom of South America to get any help at all, to even defend San Francisco. The Japanese would have been able to attack San Francisco and all the fleet was in the Atlantic. They'd have to go clean around South. So they sent our PT boat squadron of 12 boats, and we said, when the Japanese attack the Panama Canal, you guys stop them. We said, the whole fleet? They said, yes, the whole fleet. You're all we got. So we were waiting for them to come in, and luckily they didn't show up right away. So then we all got in our little PT boats, and they put us on the deck of the tankers, and we went into combat at Guadalcanal real early. Next question.
Guadalcanal, there's just a whole 3 days worth of stories there. It was one of the most serious battles of the South Pacific.
Yes.
Tell us, you guys have any specific questions?
When I arrived in Guadalcanal, we came up in our PT boats, and an American Navy plane came out and blinked to us. And I thought the message would be, welcome to our war. Let's get these little brown guys, or get these little Japs. And instead, the message blinked by Morse code was, for God's sakes, run for cover. And we was wondering, we said, why would she run for cover? Well, we found out the Japanese had 22 airfields within 100 miles. They had thousands and thousands of ships, thousands of troops, and all we had at Guadalcanal was the 1st Marine Division. And a couple of destroyers that were hiding way down Noumea, 1,000 miles away, and only coming up once a month. And our Marines were all surrounded and no defense at all. So we were sent up to stop the Japanese supply line. And when I arrived, Dick Richards, who had gone all through midshipman school with me because his name was Richards and mine was Robinson, everything in the Navy is alphabetical, I was looking at his head, back of his head all day. And he had gone up 2 weeks before I had, and he as executive officer of PT 116. And I was coming 2 weeks later in executive officer of PT 118. And already they were taking him down the wharf, and he didn't know who he was. He was out of his mind. His boat had been bombed by the Japanese. All his men had been killed except him and one enlisted man who he was holding up while the enlisted man was torn apart by sharks. And he went crazy, and he didn't know who I was. And I looked around, and our Navy base was just a native village with natives living there. I thought, what the hell am I getting into? And they said, well, first of all, everything. We have to take everything out of your boat, everything, because you'll need every ounce of speed you can get. But otherwise, you'll be sunk in a few weeks. You'll die in a few weeks. Speed's the only thing that'll save you. So he took all the inside of my boat. Well, I beat him. I lasted 8 weeks before everybody on my boat was killed and wounded, but 4 of us. And just luckily, I was hit in the head, and my helmet, my steel helmet, saved my life. It was sunken in, and I got terrible headaches, and I got ringing ears and everything else, but it didn't kill me. My skipper had his head blown off right in front of me, and everybody but 4 of us had died on the boat. So I lived through that, and I became, instead of being executive officer, I became captain of PT 118. And so I got to be captain, and then I got to go in some really big battles. And we're going to go to the really big battle, the Kennedy thing. Let's get to Kennedy. Anyway, I had arrived there in about Christmas time, and Kennedy arrived in April 5th. And the day Kennedy arrived was the first time in months that everybody had come up on a regular ship, because they all knew they were going to get sunk immediately. But Kennedy came up on an LST, which for some reason had come up in broad daylight. And the Japanese sent down 195 planes to attack that one ship. And we thought, oh my God, we didn't know Kennedy was on it, but that ship is a goner. That's what we thought. But the reason they sent it wasn't just to attack that one ship. The reason was that Yokomoto, who was admiral of the entire Japanese Navy, who was the guy that made the attack on Pearl Harbor, had come down to investigate Rabaul, the big base just north of us, from whence all the destroyers and the barges and the planes, all the Japanese came at us from Rabaul. And so when the commanding officer of Rabaul knew that the admiral of the whole Navy was going to check up on, how good he was, how good Rabaul was, he decided to show Admiral Yamamoto that he could put every plane he had, all 195 of them, in the air at once. Look how efficient he is. I've got them all gassed up. They're all ready to go, Admiral. This is what I can do. And that's what they did. But our little dinky Air Force, what we had, which was a handful of planes in those days, was smart enough to bypass all those 195 planes. And they got up to Rabaul, and they shot down Admiral Yamamoto and murdered the admiral of the entire Japanese Navy. How many of you knew that the day Kennedy arrived, we killed, our Air Force killed, the entire head of the Japanese Navy? Now, I want to get to Kennedy. Now, if you were Jack Kennedy and you got off that boat, or you were still on that LST, and you look up and you see all these planes, 195 of them, attacking you, wouldn't you be a little bit nervous and say, well, look, I'd really rather turn around and go back. I don't want to serve in PT boats. I don't want to serve up here. That's for soon. Instead, they never did sink that LST, but that LST did sink, shoot down 1-0. Good, I got this. Now, you would think that Jack Kennedy, when he first arrived, saw all those planes of the enemy, would be all upset and be nervous. Wouldn't you be a little nervous if all you saw was the enemy? You know, what he did is came to over our base. He said, tell me, are those planes with a red ball on the wings, are they our guys or they are their guys? And we said, oh no, they're the enemy. Oh, and Jack said, well, thank God we shot down the right one, because that LSD did sink one of those planes, did shoot down one of those planes. But instead of being all upset, Jack was all enthusiastic. He wasn't nervous at all. In fact, how many of you know what Jack Kennedy's first job was in the United States Navy? He was in charge of an LMD, a large mahogany desk, at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, way back in America. Nice and safe, no danger, nobody shooting at him. Even had a girlfriend, a Danish girlfriend. He wasn't married yet, so that was okay. And all he had to do was push a pencil around and sign a few vouchers. Instead, he went down and he signed up for LSTs. He had to sign a document saying he knew he was going to go in against big steel warships with a little wooden butt. And he signed it. He said, that's what I want to do.
And, excuse me, it probably because of his family, he could have gotten out of it if he wanted to, right? His dad was very famous.
Without doubt. His father was madder than hell at what he did. His brothers were mad in hell what he did. But he went and he did it himself. And Jack Kennedy, how much time we got?
Yeah, about 20 minutes, half an hour.
All right. Let's go into Jack Kennedy and stop talking about Ted Robinson.
Well, we like Ted, though, too.
What happened was we decided, our Air Force decided they would like to have 2 airfields, not just one. And the Japanese would only have 21 left. So we knew that Guadalcanal was way down here someplace on this chart. And up here, let me use my cane. This is a copy of the most famous cane in the entire world. The original of this cane is in the Smithsonian Institute. This cane is what Jack Kennedy is holding in the picture I took of him, the original of this cane. The picture I took of him after I was down in the same tent with him after I'd lost my boat, and he took this picture of me. Now, which one is cutest? Me. Okay. How about you guys? What do you think? Anyway, so Jack Kennedy and he was out there by then, and he was into every attack we made. Honey, I don't know what to do with this. Put it in the pocket? Okay. Okay, we decided we needed another airfield to help our little old Air Force. And there was the nearest other air force, other than the Russell Islands. There's one there. So we did have 2 by that time. But this airfield right here was right on New Georgia. And the Japanese had thousands of troops on Wendover. They had 60,000 on New Georgia, 40,000 on Columbara, 12,500 on Giso, 24,500 here, and they had a big amphibious base up here with thousands of soldiers. So we decided we would like to capture this airfield, but we didn't do that groundwork. The ones that did the groundwork were the Army and the Marines, and boy, I tell you, I am a great admirer of both of them, particularly the Marines. How many of you know the Marines are part of the United States Navy, which they are, and the Marines are our favorite. So we particularly put a lot of Marines to capture this airfield.
Which airfield? Is that Henderson?
No, not Henderson. Henderson was on Guadalcanal. And this was at New Georgia, this airfield. Munda Airstrip it was. It's called. So we established first of all, we had the Marines and Army capture Wendover and this little island here. And we moved our PT boat base from Guadalcanal, which was way down here south. And we moved our base up to here. And this became our PT boat base. And meanwhile, we found out the Japanese on August 1st, 1943, were going to send down 5 heavy destroyers loaded with 1,000 troops, actually 900, 1,000 troops to reinforce Munda Airstrip because our Marines and Army were beginning to win. They were beginning to capture it. And the way we got our intelligence was from the Australian or New Zealand coast watches. They were New Zealanders or Australians that had been in these islands were Solomon Islands were all owned by the British, and so they owned all the copra plantations, which got palm olive soap from the palm trees on all these islands, had copra plantations. So you lovely girls could have your lovely complexion with palm olive soap. In fact, most of the biggest customer was palm olive soap. So we asked those coast watchers to hide in these islands, to go back up in these islands where they used to manage the natives, and so they were familiar with. And we were the ones that put them ashore. We would put them ashore on a PT boat, and they would always hand me a letter, and they'd say, "See if you can get this back to the little woman in Australia and New Zealand." And we knew it was their last letter. They had a life expectancy of 2 months. Within 2 months, the Japanese would have captured them and tortured them to death. And we knew this. We put them ashore on a little Avon raft, and we shook hands goodbye. They were the bravest men I ever knew. They never came home. But anyway, they radioed to us that Japanese were coming. And they were coming on August 1st of 1943. And let's see, 40, what are they? I'm up to 42. And they were going to come right through Blackett Strait, which was 5 miles wide, and attack this base. And later on, we got a PT boat base up here that patrolled Kula Gulf because we found they came through there one time. So we got every PT boat that would run. And my PT boat was damaged at that time. So they sent me up. Incidentally, what we did with our PT boats is they were originally light gray, but we would paint them dark green and black because we hid them under the palm trees all the time. We had to hide up in the swamps and cover them at night. And so my boat was broken down at the time. So my skipper, by that time I had become exec again because an Annapolis guy had lost his boat, and they put the Annapolis guys ahead of us, 90-day wonders that were reserves. And I went up on this boat, and I went from Guadalcanal up on this boat. And this boat, you can see what happened to this boat. It was blown to bits 1 minute after I got off it. What happened was I was on the boat, and we got up there, and we radioed ashore to this little island that was going to be our base, and we said, "Send your little LCVPs, your little small boat out to get us." And they radioed back. We said, "No, we're under air attack. We're under air attack from this airfield, that airfield, that airfield. No, we can't come right now." But luckily we had some big shot captain or something was aboard, and he says, "This is Captain so-and-so, you send that goddamn boat out there right now." And so they did, and he jumped on it, and I jumped on it, and we no sooner pulled from that boat to practically where those cupboards are back there, when the boat I was just on was blown to bits. The second time I just escaped death. So I went ashore. But anyway, Jack was already up there in PT 109, and we decided to get every PT boat that would work underway. We had 15 PT boats, take them up here and go through Ferguson Passage, and we would put 4 boats across here, another 4 across here. This was about 5 miles wide, and another 4 there. And if the first group of 4 of us didn't get them, maybe the next 4th, maybe the 5th. Well, we got 15 boats up here, but we had to get through here, and the Japanese knew this. And they had a float plane base up here. Each plane carried 3 bombs, 3 100-pound bombs, and they would patrol this strait, Ferguson Passage, which was only a mile wide, over and over. They had one plane after another going just maybe about 5 times as high as this ceiling, dropping parachute flare after parachute flare to find us and then to murder us. And they would do so. We would have to hover over here, and we would wait till the plane just got by us, and we'd rush through and try to get through one at a time. Well, of the 15 boats, 3 of them never got through. But 12 of us finally got through. And we got through, and I was in the lead boat because the head commanding officer of this base down there was Branningham, who was a world hero because he had helped get MacArthur out of the Philippines at the beginning of the war. And he was in charge of our PT boat base here. And when I got up there, Branningham said to me, "Robbie, do you know anything about radar?" I said, "Yes, I do." He says, "Well, you're the longest veteran we got still alive out here." He said, "Would you be my radar officer? I'm going in on a 159 boat, and I'll be the lead boat, and you go with me, and you'll be the radar officer." So I went on a boat, and we got in, and we were supposed to have 4 boats here. There was our boat, the 159, the 157, and the 109, Jack's boat was supposed to be with us, and another boat, the 162. But we could only get one boat at a time through here, and once they got through here, it got dark, because keep in mind, everything out there was totally black, and you constantly got your eyes taken, ruined by the Japanese float planes dropping flares on you. So they would blind us, and then they would kill us. And so you couldn't see. And so once you got through here, the 109 and the 162 lost track of us, and we went way up here at the top. The 159 that I was on with Branningham, the lead boat in the attack, the head of the commanding of the whole thing. And Jack Kennedy was down in about here at that time, and some of the other boats were here, and some of the other boats were here. Well, right at 11 o'clock, I looked at my radar screen, and there came 2 pits, very large, very moving, very fast, obviously destroyers. Now, the reason I give all these speeches is there's been 6 Mommy Dearest books written that said Jack Kennedy was a coward. And you know, with the First Amendment in this country, you can write anything. If you don't believe that, just look at your magazines in the grocery store that Brent or some movie star is sleeping with his sister and all that crap you read. So there's been 6 books written that Jack Kennedy was a coward and a terrible officer. And I'm the only guy left alive. That's why I'm giving this. I'm the only guy left alive that was actually there and know all this. So anyway, we went in for our attack, and Jack, meanwhile, was looking to find the ships coming down, and only 3 boats had radar. Jack didn't have radar. All he saw was 5 feet off the water in his binoculars. Well, they got through us. We made our attack, and incidentally, how we make our attack is horrifying. What you would do is you would sneak in with all your mufflers closed, because we had 3 1,500 horsepower engines, almost 5,000 horsepower. And you could hear our boats 25 miles away. The planes could hear them above their own engines, All the shore batteries could hear us. They could hear us all around. So we had to close our overwater mufflers on the stern of this boat. And we had to sneak in, because if you went over about 10 miles an hour, the boat would stall if you try to shove your throttles forward in a hurry. That's the most important thing I've told you today. If you try to shove those throttles forward to get out of the way when something was going to ram you, the engines would stall if you hadn't opened those mufflers first. It take 15 to 20 minutes or so to open those mufflers, because you had to ring a little thing up on the bow, and the engineer who was back here, drunk with carbon monoxide, we lost lots of lives to carbon monoxide, he would have to crawl between the engines to the stern of the boat and try to close the mufflers from inside. That's the key of how Jack Kennedy got rammed. And so we had all our mufflers closed, and then and only then, when you made your attack, you would. So we would sneak in with our boat with our mufflers closed, and we went in with a 159 with a 157 next to us. And the Japanese had 1,000 men and all their crews all looking for us. And the biggest disadvantage we had is we were silhouetted by the open space where they were massed against the darkness of this large mountainous island of Kolamagara. And so they were hard to see, but radar, we could see them first. But the other boats, Kennedy and the rest didn't have it, couldn't. And they had a little guy way up in the crow's nest that saw us, and the minute they saw us, they would attack. Making PT boat attacks is the most horrifying thing in the world. I tell you, I shouldn't say this. Should I mention Duke? The thing that reminded me, when I was at Duke, I finally made enough money so I got a car. And I would be on Lover's Lane, and Duke is in Durham, North Carolina, where all the girls in North Carolina went to Duke. They go to Duke. And us Yankees from New York, we went to Duke. But my girlfriend, my little girlfriend, little Jenny Ray, my little ray of sunshine, I would be parked in Lover's Lane in my little car, and the campus cop would come and he'd put the big flashlight in the window. Oh, Jesus. Now, in those days, we didn't do some of the things you guys do these days. We were just doing a little necking and holding hands. But anyway, I was always horrified. Well, that's every time we went in for an attack, and those searchlights came on from all those destroyers. It was horrifying. How many of you have been over the Cal Expo State Fair where they have that big fountain and they have lights on it right in the middle of the State Fair? Well, that's what it would be like. There'd be all these searchlights come on, and then there'd be all these explosions of water all around. What they were 5-inch shells exploding all around us, knocking the boat sideways and all. And of course, that's where you lost hundreds of PT boats. Of our 30 officers, only 5 of us incidentally ever came home after a year. But anyway, we went in. Once the searchlight comes on, then and only then you open your mufflers and you start to speed in, and you go in till your guts give out. You go in until you say, "No, I'm going to die. Turn out of here. Let's get out of here." Well, we went into 1,400 yards. That's 14 football fields. Is how close we were, and we fired all 4 torpedoes. We each carried 4 torpedoes with 600, about 500, 350, I think, tons of dynamite in them. Anyway, we went in and we fired. Now, meanwhile, after we fired our torpedoes, we made a very tight turn. How many of you have been water skiers or in fast boats? Whenever you make a tight turn, your boat I don't care how much horsepower you had, no matter how fast you're going, the boat slows down and stops, and that's when you're going to die. Here you got 4, actually one of the destroyers broke down, so you have 4 destroyers, all firing. Each of them carried about 10 or 12, no, they had 3, 4, 2, about 6 5-inch guns. They had all their anti-aircraft guns, all their 1,000 troops, all firing at you. And so you would make a very tight turn. Well, when they saw you make that turn, they knew that our torpedoes were headed for them. that was always the same. It was to turn into us and ram us. Jack Kennedy was not the only guy that was rammed. He was the only guy that became president that got rammed. They wouldn't care if a park commissioner got rammed like me. But anyway, he was rammed. And what happened? Meanwhile, he was going back and forth down here, and those destroyers got through all of us. We fired, of the 12 boats that got in there, we fired 25 torpedoes, and I think we got maybe a goldfish, or maybe a shark. We never sunk anything that night. It was a total loss. Now, other nights we did get them, but we didn't get anything that night. Because we sunk so many destroyers, they ended up having to stop sending the destroyers down, I'll tell you. And that cut their whole supply line down to barges. But anyway, they turned into us. Well, once they turned into us, we had made our tight turn, and we had a smoke screen generator on the stern, and white smoke is very effective against searchlights. How many of you been to 4th of July parties, and you've had a block party, and pretty soon you can't see across the street with all the smoke from the flares and things? And so we would lay a smoke screen and weave at high speed and try to get out behind our smoke screen. Well, we got over here, and when we got over here, we saw just as we got over there, we saw a huge explosion. And we didn't know what it was. We knew it was probably a PT boat that had been rammed or hit, because we carried 3,000 gallons of high-octane gasoline. And so we didn't know, but it was Jack Kennedy's boat exploding. But it wasn't. We didn't know that till the next morning. And the next morning, the 162 boat that was closest to him told us what had happened. The destroyers had rammed Kennedy's boat and cut it right in half. And the next thing you know, all that's floating in Kennedy's boat was the bow. And the bow was all just wood. And the stern was where your engines were and your torpedoes and all your weight. So the stern of the boat sunk immediately with the machinist made in it, and the bow floated. And Jack found himself there floating, and the destroyers went flying by him, and his men were all thrown into the flaming gasoline, except Jack and his radio men, who was who were hanging. He was hanging on to an iron rod we had right next to our steering wheel, and the radio man was next to him. The radio man slammed into him, threw him against that metal ring, and that's what ruined his back. And you know the history. You know Kennedy had back trouble, terrible back trouble the whole time he was a president, and he was rammed against that. But he at least and the radio man stayed on the boat, whereas all the rest of the men who wasn't hanging on anything. They were thrown into the water, like this, and into the flaming gasoline. And the thing that saved Kennedy said, was the fact that the destroyer was going so fast, it carried the flaming gasoline away from that wooden hull. That's what saved him. But the enlisted men had all been thrown so far, they were in the burning gasoline. And then Jack Kennedy did something that I want you each to say whether you would have done. He was perfectly safe on that boat, and he dove into the flaming gasoline, and he dragged his men one at a time back to the hull. When we rescued Jack Kennedy, the most painful thing in the world a gasoline was, he was burned like a crisp, and he brought his men back to the hull. And the next morning, he saw that he was drifting right towards the 40,000 men on Colombia. So he told the men to make rafts from the wreckage of the bow as best they could. And then he would try to go, instead of go that way, he'd go over to a little island called Plum Island. This is a picture of Plum Island. It's not much bigger than the grounds that this school is on. And so they started to push and shove their back. But one man was so burned so badly, he was already bleeding. and nobody wanted them on their records because South Pacific is full of sharks that are attracted to blood at night. We never swam in the South Pacific, even in the daytime, without having a rifle to kill the sharks first. But nobody wanted to help this man. Jack took this man's tie string of his life jacket in his teeth. Jack had been on the Harvard, that's the correct pronunciation for Jack, Harvard swim team, and he could have swam ashore real quick because it was 2 miles. He's a great swimmer. Instead, he towed this man, bleeding, attracting the sharks, all the way back. It took him hours to finally get this man back. When we got him ashore, the man died. Jack had tried desperately. He said, "Would have you done that?" Well, Jack Kennedy did that. I wouldn't have done it. I would have tried to get ashore myself somehow. And then he got his men together, yes.
I just want to interrupt you for 1 second. We're going to have a big, long bell ring, and I need to know how many of you guys are going to be staying. Stand up if you're going to have to leave when the bell rings because of that. Some of you guys have to take the bus, yes? Okay, so will you gather your stuff real quick right now?
Yeah, it won't bother me that you have to move.
Okay, just leave it right there for me.
The audio. Yeah.
Don't step on the books.
No, he won't.
Okay, I'll keep talking meanwhile.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you that you came, that you're sorry you couldn't stay. Anyway, he decided the best way he could save his men was to swim from that island to that island to that island and get out here into Ferguson Passage so on subsequent evenings when we went through, he could flag us down. He had a underwater flashlight and he had a .45 revolver, but he didn't know whether either would work because he'd been underwater with it. And so he alone, he put Lenny Tom, who was an All-American football player from Ohio State, who was an executive officer, in charge of the men. Now, they had no food at all. They had no food for a whole week. Some of them starved to death. Kennedy was starving to death. They had no food at all for a week. And they were back here, and he would stumble and crawl across what he would be. The big problem he had was coral reefs. Every one of these islands are followed, covered in that great, look at the bandage, huh? Anyway, with coral reefs like this. And when you step on them, they cut your feet. They're awful. And so he had to stumble and swim, and a large, narrow body of water between the open ocean and a big thing like this is very strong waves, very strong currents, and he would have to swim and stumble and try to get out here and flag us down. Well, we went through there, we went through every night, but we were looking up. We were looking up at the float planes that were trying to bomb us. They're over us all night dropping bombs, and so we were trying to miss getting hit by bombs. Besides, he was in heavy, heavy waves coming through here. You couldn't see a little guy in. Flashlight no longer worked. 45 no longer worked. He was helpless. He was trying to scream and so on. We never saw him, never heard him. He was there for a week, and we had a funeral for Jack. And then one day, a week later, I was standing outside our underground operations hut, and along came 2 natives that had paddled for 30 miles from up here, and they handed me what turned out to be the most famous coconut in the whole world. Now, that coconut is not at the Smithsonian. The JFK Museum and Library got the coconut, and they got a copy of the picture I took of him. But the Smithsonian has got the cane, and they've got my camera that took the picture and the picture of both. It's the original picture. So anyway, we never saw him. But anyway, I got the coconut, and on it was written, scratched in a sharp knife or something, 11 still alive, send help, JFK. So we radioed the Coast Watcher that was in Colombagara up here. And meanwhile, some of the natives from there, from the Coast Watcher, had seen Lenny Tom back here with the rest of the crew. And so we radioed to the Coast Watcher, and the natives that spotted him down there, 2 of them came down with a coconut, and some others went over to see the Coast Watcher. And he sent some food over, but it didn't arrive. It arrived too late. Some of them had already starved to death. But anyway, we got the coconut, and I took it down to our underground operation, and I showed it to Browningham, my squadron commander. And we interrogated both of the natives as to where he was, how to get in there, and all this stuff. And we also called the Coast Watcher. And Browningham turns to me and he says, "Robbie, would you like to go in and get him? It's a terrible, dangerous mission, but would you like to go in and get him?" Now, if you're a little pissy-ass ensign, which I was at the time, and a squadron commander that has rescued MacArthur asks you to do something, you don't say, "No, I'd really rather think about it a while." You got to say, "Yes, sir, I'll go." So I did. Changed my whole life. I went in as Branningham's representative. I went in on the 157 boat. We went in Liebenauer's boat. We went in here, and we got out here, and then we had another problem. We didn't know whether these 2 natives that brought the coconut were in the Japanese payroll. But they were working for the Japanese, and they just wanted to get a PT boat up here while they were hidden in the trees and all, and we were helpless. They were sitting up on the water, and they'd blow us to bits. So we didn't know this. That was one of the real dangers we had. And Jack didn't know, but whether his message had been interrupted and what he would do when whoever came out to meet our boat would all be gunned down. So you'd think he would have maybe sent one of his enlisted men out to see it was really our boat. We were supposed to fire 3 shots from our 45 to let them know we were there, and they were supposed to fire 1 shot back. And we only fired 1 shot because we were afraid it might be a trick, and the Japanese were just waiting for that shot and they knew we were there. And so you would think Jack would have put somebody else, one of his enlisted men, in charge of coming out from hiding to see if it was really us, because that guy was going to die if it were the Japanese. No, again, he came himself. He didn't want to risk his men. Would have you done that? Or would have you said, Seaman so-and-so, you could do this, can't you? Why don't you go out there? No, he went himself because it was very dangerous. And Jack went out and he picked, and I'll never forget what he said. Here the guy's body is burned, not just with gasoline, but the heat. The heat in the South Pacific, it's about 160 degrees in the shade and no shade. He's down there burning to death, going through the water and getting out, and sunburn and gasoline burn. Anyway, we loaded them all aboard the boat, and we brought them home. But I'll never forget what he said. When we showed up, this guy said, "Where the hell have you guys been? I've been at this bus stop for a whole week now." I will never forget that. Still kidding, burned, dying, hungry. And we picked him up, and he was the same old Jack, trying to keep his the nerve of his men up so they didn't fall into destitution. Anyway, we brought him back. 1 man died on the way home. It was an awful trip. Every time we sped up, the men that were burned and all would cry with pain, and we had to slow down. But then the dawn patrol, the Japanese Betty bombers, would be all over it, so we didn't get him home before daylight. But we did get him home. We get him back, and they sent him back down the line to recuperate and to go home. And they put him in a tent, and that's why on these little pictures I have up here is one of the other famous pictures is the tent. We had never been in luxury like this. We were always lived in native villages behind enemy lines. Here is a tent, I mean a real tent. And Jack and I, because what happened a month to the day after Jack Kennedy's boat was rammed, my boat was rammed because I had been sent on another little mission by Branningham. I had become his favorite guy, apparently. And he says, Robbie, you know, if instead of just doing this stuff down in here, we went way up here to Bella La Bella, the Japanese wouldn't expect us up there. That's the limit of our 3,000 gallons of high-octane gasoline, because at high speed we burn 600 gallons an hour. So, Robbie, I'm going to send you and 3 other boats way up here and attack the Japanese when they don't expect us. They won't be hiding or anything. And he said, I'd like you to go in your own boat, the 118. I didn't say thank you, but I had to go. And I went 70 miles. I went 70 miles, the 4 of us did, 4 PTs way up here. And sure enough, there were the Japanese. This is a month after we rescued Jack, a month to the day after we rescued Kennedy. And we get up there with 4 PT boats, and here's these Jap barges and ships going by. They don't expect us at all. And we attacked them. And they didn't expect us, and we got them shot up real bad. But the trouble is we had no charts for up here. We didn't know where the reefs were. So the first 2 boats, the leader of the attack, which wasn't me, and my boat, which is the second boat, we all ended up on the reefs, the same reef the Japanese were on. And all they had to do was raid ashore.
Crystal Vargas, do not take the bus home. I don't know where you are. Crystal Vargas, do not take the bus home.
All they had to do was wade ashore, and they could bring 24,500 Japanese out there, and they had shore batteries and everything. But anyway, I'm going to cut this short. Anyway,
what's gonna happen is, it's okay, is you guys that need to go, please say, can we just give a little thank you for so far? And then if you could stay a little bit and talk about your tent experience with JFK, that would be awesome.
Well, so anyway, a month a day later, I got off the reef, and they sent me back and put me in the same tent with Jack. And whoever has to leave. Thank you for
Hang on
listening.
1 second.
Bet.
Awesome.
Oh, say, all right, just a little bit about, I was in the same tent alone with Jack for 3 months. The first thing that happened is he was in such terrible shape he couldn't walk. His feet were all cut to shreds. He could only crawl. And I loaned him this cane, the original of this cane, which had been given to me by the chief of the village. I loaned him this cane to try to stumble around as he gradually got his footing again. My wife is gradually transforming to a cane here, I hope soon. She's gone from a wheelchair and she'll be on a cane, we hope. But anyway, I gave him my cane, and I got to know him, and the first thing I noticed, he got an orders to go home. And he ripped them up. He said, I want to go home. I want to go back up the line. They said, no, you have malaria. You have practically a broken back. You can hardly walk. You're in terrible shape. You got to go home. He said, no, I want to go. Send me back up the line. I said, Jack, give me those orders. I'll put my name on them. I'll go home. But it turned out that that didn't work. And so we both went back up the line, and he went way back up here to Bella La Bella, because we were trying to capture our 3rd Air Force base. So now the Japanese would only have 19 and we'd have 3. But we were a lot closer to the 19. But anyway, they didn't send me up there. They sent me up to another base that was up here, patrolling Kula Gulf, and he went up here. So what I'm going to tell you now, I didn't see directly. But everybody told me what happened. He got up there, and you know who was going to be the air traffic controller at the airport if we captured it up here at Bella La Bella? It was going to be Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was a Navy officer in World War II, and he was in the Navy, and he was on the same island with Jack Kennedy up here on Bella La Bella for a little while. Well, anyway.
You guys probably don't know that Kennedy and Nixon ran against each other.
Yeah, one was a Democrat, one was a Republican. They ran against each other. Anyway, the long story of it is, Jack was up there, and suddenly the commanding officer said, wait a minute. These float planes that were coming out of Choiseul and attacking us every night, no matter where we were, all come out of this island here. And that's now only 40 miles away from us. 40 miles we go across there. So they went to the Marines, and they asked the Marines, we said, if we took you guys over there at night, we couldn't take you over in the daytime. We could not cross 40 miles in the daytime, or we'd all be killed by the Japanese during patrol. But we'll take you at night alone and get rid of those damn Japs on Choiseul and those float planes. So the Marines, they'll do anything. Marine guys are tough. So they said, sure, we'll go. And they went, and the next morning, they radioed to our commanding officer. They said, we have no idea the Japanese have this many men here. He said, I've already lost half my men. Would you come and get us? And we said, yes, we'll be there tonight. It's got to be dark. We can't go across 40 miles. We can't go across 40 miles in broad daylight, pick up a bunch of wounded Marines. Nobody would survive. We'd never get home alive. And so we said, we'll be there tonight. And I've never heard a Marine cry, but the head of those Marines cried on the radio. And he said, no, he said, for God's sakes, none of us will be alive tonight. For God's sakes, come and get us now. Jesus, I've lost half my men. I'm going to lose them all. And our commanding officer asked for a volunteer to go over alone in broad daylight right away that morning and pick those Marines and see if he could possibly get alive over there or possibly get alive coming home. Had I been there, I would have jumped behind the biggest palm tree I could find. Not one PT officer volunteered except Jack Kennedy. He said, I'll go, and I'll go right now. And he didn't have enough fuel to go all the way over and all the way back because he had run out of fuel. Instead, he had to talk somebody into towing him halfway back, not to go all the way. And for some reason, those Japanese planes never showed up that day. We don't know why. And Jack brought those men home alive. There is not a PT boat skipper or officer or anybody in PT boats that was out there at that time that doesn't admire Jack and think he was the toughest, most courageous guy they ever met. We all admire him. I was a Republican at the time. My wife's been president of Sacramento Suburban Republican Club. And we all think Jack was a fantastic guy. I kept in touch. That we saved Jack. He finally, what he did after he brought those Marines home, he went to the commanding officer, he went to Branningham, and he says, now I will go home. And he went home. And I kept in touch with Jack for years through my wife's family. My wife's father did home decorating work for Jackie's family, has done it for years, for Doris Duke's family, the richest woman in the world. My wife's from Newport, Rhode Island. Her family were friends with Jack's. And for years I kept in touch with Jack till the day he died through my father-in-law. I would come back to see my father-in-law, and he'd say, oh, Jack Kennedy was here the other day, and he was talking about you, and he would send messages back and forth through my father-in-law. And I kept in touch with him. He was a great guy, and that's the end of the story. Now, you want to go home, don't you?
Questions, guys? Check the list.
Yes.
I have a question. My grandmother, she was one of the first stewardess, and my mom, and she would tell me stories about how she actually got to meet JFK. He was on her flights, and he had Addison's disease, I think.
A what? Yeah, oh, he had everything.
Did that affect him in any way of trying, like...
Terrible shape.
Yeah.
He was in terrible shape the whole time he was president. Yes.
I know that JFK didn't show any ambitions for president, but did he show any ambitions for other future things?
After he was president, I'm not sure. As I say, I kept in touch with him, but
He means in the tent, Mr. Robinson. When you were living with him in the tent, did he ever talk about political aspirations when you guys were tent mates?
no, I'll tell you what he talked about. we were in the tent. We were with native villages, and you know, one of the things that drive me crazy is they keep saying he was a womanizer. I tell you what, the natives in our villages that we all live, the women never wore anything above the waist. They were all running around topless, and they never heard of a bra, and therefore things kind of sagged rather early, and nature set in. But anyway, Jack's take on that was, he said, Robbie, he said, these natives have no. Somebody better show her where the bathroom.
We got you.
You got it for the bathroom? Okay. He said he said to me, nobody. I've been talking to the chief of the village, and these people have a life expectancy of 35. They're the same as they did in medieval times because they have no medical care, whatever, no doctors, no medicine. They get all their food by walking barefooted because they have no shoes out on the coral reefs to catch the fish. Their main dish to eat is fish. And they real early often get bad feet, and they die. He said someday a rich country like America should help people like this. There's people like this all over Africa, all over South America, all over the world. And he said, I've met some of them when I've traveled with my father, who was ambassador to England. And he said, we should help them. And he told me that alone in the tent. And the first thing Jack did when he became president of the United States was start the freedom, what do you call it? Peace Corps. That's the first thing he did. And he was interested in helping people. I'll give you one other example, but let's take this question.
Is there like one main idea or something that you really want us to take back from this interview? Like remember? What's like the main thing that you want us to remember after today?
After being with him,
After being with you?
What would you like the kids to take away from this talk? What one important thought would you leave
well,
us with?
I will take. I'll leave you this. You already.
Remember volleyball players, if you're still on campus, 7th grade is 2:45 to 4:30 in the big gym. 8th grade is 3:45 to 5:30.
Welcome to our world.
Now I grew up. When you read my book, you'll see I grew up in real poverty, and so I made up my mind if I ever amounted to anything, I would help others. When I went for the telephone company, I became planning engineer of Northern California. Incidentally, AT&T is the biggest company in the world, as you know. I had everything from Fresno to Oregon to decide what kind of equipment went in. I became planning engineer of the company. Then I became head of the Speakers Bureau of the whole state of California. Then I became the executive speechwriter for all the executives of the company. So I had some real huge jobs. And I always determined that I would help others. And so finally, when I retired with two nice pensions, one a Navy commander and one a executive in Pacific Telephone, I decided I would help others. And my wife has done the same thing. And we do entirely, we have done so much. I don't want to. We are the only people in Sacramento that already have a grove of trees named the Ted and Lynn Robinson Grove out at Mather Park by vote of the Board of Supervisors of Sacramento County. And my wife was Woman of the Year all through the 70s for the work she did for Easter Seal, because she comes from a family from Newport, Rhode Island. Newport, Rhode Island is the richest place, not in the United States, in the world. In the world. But she's not part of the richest family. Her father worked, he did painting and gold leaf and in Jack Kennedy's home and those rich homes. But we have decided that's right. The best advice I can be, if you want to be happy with yourself, is to help others. And I know a lot of you do that already. Don't just look after yourself. Start helping others. And, you know, this little gal, help with MS along with a whole bunch of other little girls. Last time I call her in the evening just before she goes to bed so she knows somebody still loves her. And the last time I called her, I said, Linda, I said, there's a new book out by our favorite author. I said, I'm going to send it to you. There was a long pause. She started to cry and she said, Ted, I can't turn the pages anymore. I mean, it kills me. I'm going to fly back there again real soon to see what I can do for her. And then the last call I had 2 nights ago to her, she said, Ted, now I can't feed myself anymore. There are scads of people in this world that are like this. You have a whole bunch of people in Oak Park. You can't imagine the number of people in Sacramento that have never been to Lake Tahoe. They're too poor. That's why I worked in parks, because the parks are full of poor people that can't go out. Because I couldn't go anywhere when I was a kid except Casino Park, which was right next to my house. And that's where our family spent our time. And I said, I'll help parks because that's what helps poor people. So I would advise you, if you want to be proud of yourself when you die, is so you can say, well, I helped this one and I helped that one, and so on. And right now I'm helping somebody pretty close to me right here. And
So
she's
you
been
say
helping
that-
people all over.
Would you say that giving beats getting anytime?
That's the best. Yeah, I use that expression all the time.
We love it. We love it. Thank you so much for being here today. Give them a big round of applause.
And most of you don't have money, but if you do have money, or you want to buy a book, even if you don't have money now, but you have money later, you can always, I'll give you my card, or I can mail you.
We're gonna put hopefully have on the website that we're building for you a place where people can purchase your books as well.
Yeah, well,
so
keep, you can have
We're gonna
some.
keep you. I talked a little bit to your wife. We're gonna keep you posted on our progress. We've got quite a bit of film editing to do now, I think, after this session. So it's going to be really exciting for us. And if I could get, where are the 5 captains? If I could get somebody get their picture with Mr. Robinson and also with Mrs. Robinson. In a few minutes. And anybody else? There's water here and cookies. You help yourself.
You want me to go over there,
I'm
huh?
going to wrap up.